First of all, introducing our challenger.
Out of the blue corner.
He's going to step in and he does. It's all over.
Let's bring on the boom.
This is Eternal MMA.
Right, everyone, welcome back and thank you for joining us here once again for another edition of the Eternal Insiders Podcast, powered by Fight HQ, the official uniform partner for Eternal MMA. And with that, we're here today to talk about the epic weekend of mixed martial arts that was Eternal 90 and Eternal 91 here with Matt Bones Williams. We've already done this once today, talking about Eternal 90. We're back again now to break down Eternal 91, all the action from the main card, maybe a little bit of prelim action as well, and all the good things that went down from that particular weekend. It was an absolutely epic way to cap off a fantastic year for Eternal MMA. Couldn't have asked for anything better. A lot of great fights, a lot of fantastic moments. Myself and Matt Bones Williams were there to see it live and in person. Him in the commentary booth, me over the other side of the cage, taking it all in. We had an absolute treat, and so did the fans. So we're here to talk about all those good things. Matt, you're in the gym now. We've changed locations. What a setting that is there, brother. Eternal 90 was crazy. We backed it up with Eternal 91. If we thought we weren't going to get a treat like we did with Eternal 90 for Eternal 91, this was just that level and then some, man. It was a special weekend.
Yeah, incredibly special, man. And it was my pleasure to get to spend some time with you there. Yeah, a few distractions on the other side of the cage there, mate. Not sure what all the direct eye contact was about. But, you know, like a true professional, I just got on with the job, mate, got it done.
I liked it, mate. Yeah, that was just that was admiration from close but far. Yeah, I don't know if you were sort of sensing that, but that's what was going on there. So I was there learning from the best, mate, and I leveled up that weekend thanks to you. So like I said in the last video, appreciate you guys, appreciate you, T, Cam, Ben, everyone involved with Eternal MMA for having me up and showing me the ropes. So I talked enough about that in the last Eternal 90 video, so make sure you check that one out on YouTube before you get your teeth sunk into Eternal 91. Like we said, we're going to break it all down for the main action on the main card. We had an absolute scorcher of a card for this one here. We kicked off proceedings after some incredible prelims hitting to the pro ranks with Cole Smith versus Jordan Gamble. Jordan Gamble coming into this one as an 0-2 fighter, mixed martial artist out of Lions Den, coming up against Cole Smith, who's a former Army veteran for New Zealand. Spent most of his time in martial arts as a boxer. He did try his hand a couple of times in mixed martial arts, had an amateur fight for Eternal MMA against Ash Prendergast in a fight that was sort of billed, I guess, as a clash of sort of the former veterans. I can't remember what the card was, but that was a crazy good fight, and good to have Cole Smith back. It went the way of Jordan Gamble. He needed the win here, given that he was an 0-2 fighter. I'll let you break this one down, but it did just seem that Jordan Gamble being the more complete mixed martial artist, having sort of all the tools, the kicks, the punches, ultimately the grappling that got it to the ground. And he finished in the first round over Cole Smith. Again, Cole Smith at the ripe old age of 42 or 43 years of age. It was a good way to kick off the card, and not a bad way for Jordan Gamble to get his first win as a pro.
Yeah, it was a really nice way to start the card. I've been a fan of Cole Smith through his career. I watched quite a lot of boxing too, and he's been it just seems like he's in the ring every second weekend punching on. That his style in boxing is really aggressive and come forward, but his story is quite an inspiring one for me. And to see him in the ring at 42, the cage at 42 years old on the weekend, actually kicked my ass into gear this week. Cole Smith has had, I believe he's had a stroke. He's had issues with his heart, and his weight misses in the past, yet keeps coming back. Like he's that fighting spirit that saw him serve our country back home, and New Zealand carries on with his Māori warrior spirit as a fighter too, and just keeps on persevering. I don't think that's the last we'll see of Cole Smith either, but for me, I got back to Melbourne. I had like a bit of a rocky couple of days, but yesterday I laced up my runners, inspired by Cole Smith, and got back on the road. Got back to train again this morning. So it was an awesome way to start the card, inspiring for me too. So good to see Cole Smith back there. Jordan Gamble. Now I said it in the lead up, 0-2 coming into that fight. He's just another one of these guys that the 0-2 it doesn't really serve him in terms of his capacity, his level of mixed martial arts. In a fight where there's two combatants, one person has to cop the L, right? And unfortunately, that was Jordan Gamble in his previous 2 outings. But we know how good he is. He's an excellent grappler. As a southpaw too. That matchup wasn't a great one for Cole Smith, as it opens up the kicking game for the southpaw. You saw Jordan Gamble repeatedly kicking the body and the arms of Cole Smith, and occupying the center line with his lengths too, which was forcing Cole Smith to duck and dip and roll and throw some big bombs over the top as he does. And, it would have only taken one of those to connect, and fortunes might have favored a different fighter. But it was Jordan Gamble, whose bets paid off, excuse the pun, who took it to the ground in that positional control from the back mount, spreading out the legs, just getting it done with the punches. It was a cool way for him to bring up the victory. You could see in the post-match interview, which was my first on the main card, actually, how much it meant to him. It was like a giant burden was lifted off his shoulders. And so I'm looking forward to seeing Jordan Gamble back in the Eternal Cage next year, Luke.
Yeah, no, it was a very nice moment, especially for the people that he thanked for getting to that point. And you're shouting out his beautiful partner and everything, obviously making note that it's not just the fighters and everything that are sacrificing so much in this game. It's the people close to them as well. Their partners involved have to make a lot of sacrifices in order for these guys to live their dreams too. So not just a good way to get his first win and start to shore up that record a little bit, but something nice that he could share with his family as well. And of course, hats off to Cole Smith too, getting in the ring and inspiring you to get back into what you're doing there too, man. I'm curious, how's that been going since you've been back with Cole Smith, inspiring you to put the trainers back on and get out for a run? How are you feeling after that sort of first couple of days of getting back on the bike?
I told myself moving forward, there's going to be no more excuses, Luke. So no more excuses for me. So I won't dwell too much on how the body's feeling today. It's forward momentum. I've knocked up 11K on the road for my first run back. So feeling pretty good about that. I have my Thai trainer. We've got a Thai living at my house. You might have seen him crawl past on the ground in the 90 review. So he rode his mountain bike behind me and just yelled at me in Thai, which is also its own kind of inspiration. He's only weighs 61 kgs, but for some reason I'm still scared of him. So that inspired me. Maybe, you know what, maybe you'll see me eye to eye with number one contender in Sydney in 2025.
Look out. Look out, a little bit of a prediction getting thrown out there. See what kind of shape you can get in, ready to put his hand up at any moment, just in case we need a late call up Matt Bones Williams. I'd pay money to see that, man. Let's go, baby. Hell yeah.
Let's go.
I'll tell you what inspired me, though, and I mean, look, inspiration before the fight, because we talked about this pretty heavily in our card review before we did make our way up to the Gold Coast, was Connor Birch versus Chris Ustianovsky. Now, this one was another one that was early doors for Connor Birch, getting the job done in the first round with an overhand right. There was two things there for me. My initial reaction was early stoppage, but I think that's because I was selfishly thinking that we were going to get, what we talked about as being two of the greatest strikers that we have here in the country right now, going to put down an absolutely epic performance. It does have to be noted, and we don't have to bang on about it, but obviously Chris Ustianovsky did miss weight. So maybe a bit of, we call it a bit of a sweet, revenge, I guess, for Connor Birch to get the job done, because most of the time when the fighter misses weight, it's the fighter that misses weight ends up getting the job done. So nice for Connor to get the job done nice and early, and he looked good doing it. Again, I was hoping that we were going to see some fireworks through this one, given how much we built it up, but you can't take anything away from Connor Birch getting the job done over an absolute beast like Chris Ustianovsky. Hats off to him in the bantamweight division. This was an absolute crack away for him to notch up another win. Yeah.
And I said after on the mic, I was like, who's here for the Highlander? And the roof almost came off the Southport Sharks. Well, I tell you, I'd travel, if I wasn't commentating, if I wasn't working, I'd travel right across the country to watch Connor Birch. I think the question for Connor Birch now is like, just how high is that ceiling? Because he's going straight to the top. Excuse me. His his finish against Lucas Gracilli up in Perth, like I said, one of my favourite little sequences for a finish with the hands. It was beautiful the way he shifted through that little series with his footwork, led to the body and came upstairs to finish that fight. From that, he's been right at the top of my radar. And going up against Jankowski, who's known for his ability to jab out of both stances and traveling backwards, the challenge for Birch to get in tight where he could hurt Jankowski with his power was going to be to mitigate that jab. And there was a little moment just prior to that knockdown where Jankowski stepped back with a beautiful jab. It was pinpoint accurate with no tail whatsoever. He was like a sniper from 1,000 yards. And then he threw a textbook check hook, short, powerful, specific, completely balanced. And that showed just how dangerous he is. But Birch faked the entry, popped back to draw the strike and came over the top with the right hand. And what you saw in that little 45 seconds, as long as it lasted, was two of the best strikers in Australia. And the amount of power that Conor Birch possesses at bantamweight should have those guys quaking in their boots. He's fought right up as heavy as welterweight, like he said.
I think he said at some point he weighed 80 kilos or something like that. Yeah, like he was a much bigger boy. Yeah,
he was a big boy, and he's just knocking everybody out. But he's also in his amateur career, I think he had 11 amateur fights. He's submitting people too. Jankowski will bounce back. Of course, at Lions 10 they'll address that weight miss and make some adaptations. Well done to Conor Birch for stepping up and taking that fight regardless. Like you said, I used to be a big old boy, and proofs in the pudding with that right hand. That was 3 servings of dessert. That one.
It certainly was, man. And again, like I couldn't help but have that slight feeling like it was a hell of a knockout. And I watched the fight back. And when I said the fight back, I mean, it went for such a short amount of time. But getting to sort of look at it, I guess, from not cage side, like that to me was a good stoppage. There would have been follow-up shots, I thought, in the moment because he still kind of had his bearings about him, but he was a bit wobbly sort of getting up. So for my money now, watching it back, good stoppage. I think my heart was just wanting to see that fight go like a full 3 rounds or something like that because of just how skilled both of those guys are. And we saw like from both of those guys, as you said, in the seconds the fight did last, like just that striking on absolute display. So again, hats off to Conor Birch. What a way for him to move to 2-0 in his pro career. So he's got 2 finishes. Like you said, you mentioned that finish against Lucas Gracilli, pardon me, and now Christos Jankowski. Like that's a couple of great feathers in his cap to keep the ball rolling for him. And like you said, Christos Jankowski will certainly be back. High hopes for him in the bantamweight division. Hopefully he can get back to the gym. And if there was any issues with the weight cut, I don't know what the actual issue was, but hopefully he can get himself on top of that and we can see him come back soon because both of those guys, just absolute must-see TV. We talked about it pretty heavily before we got to the card, and they put it on display for Eternal 91 to keep the ball rolling just nicely there. We did have, after this, another really high-level fight between a couple of bulls in the middleweight division. Blair Bretag coming against Cam Rowston. Obviously, Cam Rowston coming off Dana White's Contender Series, where the fight did not go his way. You talked a little bit about this in the last podcast we did, with that weird body-on-body matchup that he had against the guy that was about half his size in terms of his height. Blair Bretag, obviously a guy coming in very hyped because he's a man that does not know the second round. Up until this point in his pro career, I was ready to dub him No Time Bretag, considering he's just knocking people out in the first round inside the first 30 seconds, or his lone loss, he's getting knocked out in the first round himself. So you spoke to Cam Rowston on the mic. Cam Rowston, my apologies, on the mic after the fight. Asked him what the game plan was, considering that Bretag's not a man that's familiar with second rounds. And he said, well, just that, get him to the second round and see what happens. And he took him to the second round, and he ultimately got the job done by the rear naked choke to keep the ball rolling. After he had a calf slicer in between that and a little side mission that he had after Dana White's Contender Series. He knows where he wants to be. He's great on the mic. He's got the skills everywhere. Blair Bretag will be back, but it was Cam Rowston's night in the middleweight division for Eternal 91.
Yeah, Cam Rowston's going places. There's no doubt in my mind. The problem for Blair Bretag was a unique one, and it was always going to be difficult to solve when you've got a guy who's that tall and can play long against a power hitter like Bretag. That then puts the onus on Bretag to get into the middle range. So he needs to get past the long-range weapons of Rowston. The trap being is that when he gets close, then he's opening up an opportunity for Rowston to enter the clinch and to drag it to the mat. And that was kind of what was happening. So Bretag would do an excellent job of getting inside, getting past the range. Rowston would dip. He'd go shoulder to chest, and he'd initiate the grapple. One of the questions I had for this fight was the same as most people. What does Bretag look like in the second round? And the answer to that is he looks top tier. He looks incredible. He's got all the skills, and he does, even though he's loading up and throwing a lot of power. For me, there wasn't a lot of discernible difference between Blair Bretag in the first, Blair Bretag in the second. His grappling defense in that armbar where he hitchhiked out of it, I'm sure his arm would have been pretty sore the next day because it was fully hyperextended. But that speaks to his level of grappling defense on the ground. It also speaks to his heart and his willingness to go deep in a fight. So, yeah, I think this fight really serves both gentlemen, Luke. It serves Cam Rowston in that it was the name and the style of fight that he needed to put himself straight back at the top of a conversation for the top middleweight in Australasia to get his name back in the notebook of the UFC matchmakers, Dana White Contender Series, etc. And it serves Blair Bretag in that he gets cage time. He gets to face adversity. He gets to mature from this performance. So I reckon Blair Bretag is a very mature thinker. I really, really like Blair Bretag. Hope to get to sit down and have a conversation with him one day more than just in passing. I think this fight will really serve Blair Bretag and kind of bulletproof him for the future. Interesting at the end, Rowston, I gave him opportunity to kind of, send a little message out to anybody that might be watching. I thought that he might shout out UFC matchmakers, ask for another shot on the Contender Series. The first names that came out of his mouth was Matt Myers, who's waiting in the wings, hasn't fought for a long time, had a cancelled match in 2023. But by all accounts, he's training very hard in that room out there in Adrenaline MMA in Cheltenham and is ready for his comeback next year. So he would have been watching that one. We know that Eternal shared a quote of his saying that he was ready to jump back into the mix. Also, the winner of the main event now being Darcy Vendy, Cam Rowston was pretty interested in who the winner of that fight might be. So he's certainly at the top of that ladder. I wouldn't be surprised if those three have a little love triangle going on through the early part of 2025, Luke.
No, he certainly he called out a lot of middleweights sort of in his post-fight interview. It was he had a really couple of cool moments there where it also just highlighted that, and I think this might have got talked about in the commentary booth, that middleweight hasn't been, I guess, like the most stacked division, hasn't been like the division that's had sort of the most action, but all of a sudden, like, we got some middleweight action going on. Obviously, we're going to get to the main event that happened with John Martin Fraser versus Darcy Vendy, but this was a high-level matchup. We got Matt Myers returning. There's so much like kind of action that's happening in middleweight all of a sudden. It's just becoming like a real kind of division to watch. So it'll be certainly interesting to see how that plays out coming into next year. But you're right. Look, if you do get a chance to talk to Blair Bretag, I had Blair on the podcast, and genuinely one of the most interesting, introspective people that I've ever talked to on here. And he's a very smart guy too. Has a lot of really good things to say. He's very well spoken. You wouldn't know if you didn't know he was a fighter, that he was a fighter, because he's just in the cage, he's an absolute savage, and then outside of it, just a real well-spoken, very smart. This is not to say that mixed martial arts not smart or well-spoken or anything, mind you, but you just don't get that impression from him, and then you see him in the cage, he's an absolute beast. So for as long as that fight lasted, against a guy like Cam Rowston and how high level he is, and given the experience he is, given the experience that he has, pardon me. I think you're absolutely right in that stock does go up for Blair Bretag. It's a small setback, but I've got no doubt that we'll be seeing Blair knocking more people out in the first round for a lot to come for his career. And for Cam Rowston, certainly inserts himself back into that conversation, gets himself back with 2 wins, wants to obviously get himself back for a shot in the UFC, but let's see how it all shakes out in the middleweight division going forward. With Matt Myers returning in, with Darcy Vendy being a new champion, which we'll get to. We get to a couple more fights that happened before this, though, and Don Marfan versus Tom Pratt in the lightweight division. Man, Don Marfan, I said this on Instagram after the fight. I don't think I've seen a man come into a fight for Eternal MMA so ready to take a win. Obviously we sit by the cage and we're unbiased and we want to see who's going to come out on top, and whoever gets the win, happy days to them. But I just looked at Don Marfan in that moment and I just thought to myself, my God, this kid is not losing this fight. Like, he was just pacing back and forward in the cage, and it wasn't for show. Like, he was just so primed and so ready to go. And he said this after the fight, this is the best he's ever felt. It's the best camp he's ever had. He's leveling up every single day at Team Compton Training Center. We see that with his striking. He made mention of, obviously Steve Compton leveling up his striking. The fight obviously ended in the first round with that submission, which is what Dom's known for his exciting high-level grappling. And it's not just lay and pray grappling, it's exciting high-level grappling. But in the short space of time that we had him for against, an up-and-coming tough prospect like Tom Pratt, Don Marfan, he called this. He said he's going to end it in the first or second round by submission, and he did just that in the first round, and he looked damn good doing it too. If it wasn't for a man named Quillan Salkeld being sort of his kryptonite, Don Marfan might already be a champion, but he moves to 6-2 in his career, and he looked unbeatable at Eternal 91, man. You saw it firsthand. Tell us what you thought about Don Marfan getting his next win over Tom Pratt.
Yeah, I agree. He looks unbeatable, and the resolve that he's developed. We speak about the value that losses could have for a guy like Blair Bretag, right? 2 against Quillan Salkeld, 2 losses. I've seen a change in the way that Don Marfan's come back from both of those fights. He's always been a really nice guy out of the cage, but he's just so mean now when he's coming in, and that's why I called him the DMF.
The DMF, I loved that. It was so good. That's going to stick, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
That came to me in the moment.
Nice.
Just sorry. Yeah,
just off the top.
when he got that victory, he turned into like an animal for a second. He was growling. He was like screaming at people in the crowd. I'm sure if he could have torn his skin off and run around with just his bare skeleton, he probably would have. It was just such like a raw expression of, just like primal instincts, know?
Yeah.
And you can relate that back to when he got in the cage. Did you see him when he got in the cage, how locked on he was?
That's what I was talking about, man, when I'm sitting there watching him cage side and he's just pacing back and forward. And like, it wasn't for show, like he's doing anything like, oh, this is me trying to hype the crowd up and make him think that I'm someone I'm not. He was just so locked in. And that's why I thought when I saw him, like, oh man, like this is going to be like Don Marfan. Happy to be wrong if it didn't turn out that way, but my instincts were proved to be right. Like, he just was relentless, and the energy that he had and just the level that he showed from the get-go, all on display before the fight even started.
Yeah, big time. The street Buddha mantle was such an apt one for that lad, isn't it? Yin and yang, like the nice guy outside of the cage.
Yeah.
The namaste. But the only question is when he says a win like that is namaste, how far does this guy go? There's a couple of interesting things happening at the top of the lightweight division. I love this. Like, Marfan was asking for a veteran next. Wow. Yeah. Becker's on a 2-fight win streak. Coming off that win versus Diachi Kamiya, I think it was. And then he had to cancel match up in Perth. But Becker's looking in career best form. He's one of the most capped guys that we have, certainly at lightweight. I like that for Marfan, especially with, and I think that's a very good fight for Marfan, a very good fight. I'd love to see that. But with Webb out injured and for how long, I think for me that's a fight that makes sense. If not, an experienced Japanese fighter. We know they're top tier, especially in the lightweight division. So, yeah, I'm interested to see a little bit of a conundrum. I think Cam and Ben have a conundrum on their hands in terms of what to do at lightweight. But the signs are good. The signs are good. It's always been our marquee division, hasn't it, Luke, the lightweight division?
Yeah, it certainly has been through those the kind of the middle light classes and that sort of thing have always been extremely strong. So we talk about before the middleweight division now sort of coming in as another exciting division. Like lightweight is always incredibly good, and I'm glad that he made mention of guys, potentially wanting to fight a veteran in his next fight, because that's really what needs to come next for him. And he said it best, like from memory, he said something like he wants to go up against someone where people are going to doubt him that he can't win this fight and watch me prove them wrong. And like, I'm not going to be one to bet against him in the absolute form that he's in. It's very easy to talk about people leveling up. You can say that about so many people. Oh, we watched this guy level up before our eyes. But Dom's grown up in Eternal MMA, and at the start of his career, like his striking just was not there. And by his own admission, he said that when he first came into team competence, he had zero striking, like nothing. He's a credentialed grappler. He's medaled in a number of grappling competitions. That was always something that's there. But even that's like coming up crazy. Again, for the small amount of striking that we got to see him put on in that first round, like, is that something I can ask you to talk about in what you've seen from Dom striking? This has got, Stephen Compton written all over it. If he really puts this together like the way he is and he keeps leveling up, and he will because he's so smart and he's so in tune with his training and like this is just his absolute life, like, we're just going to have a beast in our hands, like a pick your poison type thing. You want to strike with a guy that's Steve Compton trained, or do you want to go to the ground with an absolute beast who is not about the lay and pray? He's looking for something exciting everywhere he goes, but his striking really is, it's on the way up.
Yeah, well, I can speak from personal experience in this regard. I've got a guy, Roy Armistead, who he finished Taser Malone in the first round at Carrara Stadium back on the GC. He's a very good top-level striker. He's 10-0 in kickboxing, 10-0 in K1 out of my gym. And after he finished Taser Malone, people were a little bit surprised that I gave him a Marfan on debut. Now, our thinking, misguided, it turned out to be, was that from looking at his amateur days, that Marfan was predominantly a grappler, and we saw a lot of holes on the tape that we watched him. And a skinny little kid who would pretty much shoot. He would even pull guard. Come into the pro fight, he turns up to weigh-ins about 7 feet taller, 300 feet wider, with lats looking like a fucking hang glider, and came out and struck with Roy, who's a 10-0 pro K1 guy, and like matched him on the feet and like hurt Roy at a lot of times, and still implemented a really high level grappling game and took some huge shots too, man, in that fight. So what I know about Marfan is that he can hang with the best strikers in Australia, because that's what Roy Armistead is. And if you don't believe me, go and watch his last fight on UFC Fight Pass in Auckland just to see the level of this kid. But he's really resilient. He's got a chin on him too. And if he gets anywhere near a body lock with you up against the fence, then it's just bad news bears. I don't see a lot of guys out grappling him. That's why the Becker fight, who's one of the best MMA grapplers we have in the country, with a really tight squeeze and some thunderous hands, is so intriguing to me. Plus these other black belt judokas, black belt Brazilian jiu-jitsu players from Japan are incredibly vetted with a ton of experience on their back.
No, and there's a couple of things that I just want to mention there too off the back of this Dom Marfan performance. It's made the Quillen Soulkilled fights look even better for both of those guys. For Dom Marfan, because Quillen Soulkilled are the only 2 losses on his record both times. Obviously, Quillen Soulkilled has gone on to the UFC and he's just looking damn near unstoppable in his own right. It's looking good for Quillen too, because of like how good that we're seeing that Dom Marfan is. Like, it's a stock raiser for both of these guys, because they're so intricately intertwined in each other's career, given that they fought each other twice. And, Dom Marfan, if he keeps going at this rate, obviously he said he wants to be in the UFC, and he's going the right way about it. He knows he wants that next challenge against a guy like Jack Becker. But on the same token, you can't forget about a guy like Jack Becker, who, was on the cusp of potentially going to the UFC himself. Like, what's to gain for him by fighting a guy like Dom Marfan? Well, Dom Marfan's now established himself as one of the premier lightweights in the country. Like, to be able to stop a guy like that who's on such a hot streak right now. Like, it just makes for an insanely intriguing matchup. So let's call for that. I want to see Don Marfan versus a guy like Jack Becker, or like you said, maybe another high-level Japanese guy we could get come over, to have him sort of test his mettle against some of those guys that fight with different rule sets. That certainly has to be said. But Don Marfan, absolutely hats off to you, brother. What a guy. And another guy who's very different outside of the cage, and he is in the cage. Just one of the nicest dudes, extremely smart, an absolute savage inside the cage. And how could you not be fighting at a Team Compton training center? So big time win for him. Hopefully see him back in the cage sooner rather than later. Now, we did have Frank Jankowski putting up his flyweight championship to be taken against Takeshi Taniguchi. This was originally not supposed to be a fight, of course. Frank coming in and saving the day essentially for Takeshi to be able to keep him on the card when he lost his opponent. Frank obviously training over in Perth, Western Australia. So most of his fights over there. He's an incredibly popular fighter. Always blows the roof off the HBF Stadium in Perth, Western Australia. So this fight ultimately went to 5 rounds. Initially in the fight, just from looking at the action, and look, to be honest, at times the action was a little bit slow. And I guess I just say that because we were treated to so much like high level action across 2 cards. So it was high level technical stuff, but I came out of that fight at the end assuming that Frank had won this fight. Watching it back now, I agree with, I think 2 of the judges had it 49-45. And I agree with that now. Just being able to see, I think a point that Ben Vickers made on the broadcast was, I hope that the judges can see some of the inside work that Takeshi's doing with just the little punches and that sort of thing. When Frank, to be honest, for all the control, wasn't doing any damage. Takeshi Taniguchi coming over and training at CMBT from Japan. He's only been here for, a couple of months, I think he's been here. And he's walking away with the flyweight championship. But again, has to be said, hats off to Frank Jankowski for coming in on short notice, putting his title on the line, and keeping us another good fight on that card. But Takeshi Taniguchi, one of 2 Japanese prospects that we've got out of CMBT doing big things. This was a strange fight. I'm curious to hear what you thought the initial result was. And did you watch it back and did you think any differently?
Look, I'm not a company guy. Like, I'm the color commentator, so I'm quite happy saying I thought the fight was boring. I didn't enjoy the fight. There was moments in it that I found quite entertaining. Obviously, Takeshi is an entertainer. He was playing the air guitar on the stall between the 4th and the 5th. He was there to have a good time. We've come to see this from some of the Japanese athletes who come over. They are performers, and if you look back at the history of MMA, being a performer in the pioneering days of MMA was really important. We used to see a lot of professional wrestlers come over in Pride, etc., and it was largely about the performance. Japanese people generally fairly reserved, but there's always 2 sides to their personality. Takeshi, even at weigh-ins, was walking around like he owned the joint. He'd been there for 5 seconds, and he's walking around doing this weird like eating rice thing with his hands. I thought, in terms of how the fight went, but coming into the 4th round, after the point was taken on my notes, I showed Tanada and Ben. I was like, I think it could be a draw coming in after that point deduction. So, and I felt that Takeshi won the next 2 rounds. So I thought it was right. I had my perspective changed on MMA judging last year. I went and had myself accredited as a judge, MMA judge, with Klanger and Steve Percival, two of the best referees that Australia's ever had, UFC referees, and got myself qualified, which has given me quite a unique insight now into how moments are scored up against the fence, and how to perceive significant moments, both in effective grappling and effective damage, or effective impact, as they like to call it in the sport. And in 5 rounds of action where there weren't massive discernible moments, there were some things that stood out. One of the things for me was the difference in the effect of the leg kicks. when Taniguchi threw it, there was a noticeable impact that would stiffen up the leg of Frank on a couple of occasions. Frank was also doing work, but those at the end of the rounds, when I look back, I'd go, who would I rather be at the end of this round? And the answer was almost exclusively Taniguchi, who also up against the fence. Yes, he got taken down, but they weren't big slams. He wasn't getting picked up and dropped on his head. He was getting mat returned and he was getting back up. Intersecting those moments, there was excellent short elbows, particularly when he locked Jankowski into him with the whizzer. The left whizzer was something that Frank didn't address till later on in the fight, and was holding him in place. And the wrist fighting with the right hand of Taniguchi to the up elbow sock nut, it's called in Thai, and the little short knees, they were what stood out through the whole fight. There was a pivotal moment in the third, I felt, where Taniguchi is often actually quite reckless when he rushes, like his chin's right up in the air. He kind of chases guys, and I think that's something that CMBT will address after this fight. But he caught Frank moving along the cage. He tagged him, and he looked like he might be hurt, which ended up in that position where Frank the Tank was in turtle, and Taniguchi reverted back to his old Shudo rule sets and drove a knee straight in to his ear. That left us with an Aljamain Sterling and Peter Yant moment, didn't it?
That's
where
what resonated in my head at
Frank,
the time, yeah. Yep.
Frank was really hurt from that, man. And there's so many. I love the Wolves 10 guys. They're such stand-up guys, and their gym culture is so strong with Steve Walden at the helm. He was really hurt, and he's a champion who came across the country to someone else's hometown with a different opponent who wasn't supposed to be his opponent to put his title on the line. And in that moment, a lot of people would have sat back and take
take that moment
round,
to be
so
like, hey, I've done you a favor, I'm hurt. Like, just, you'd forgive him for being like, look, let's just take this one, take the W and get out with the disqualification or no contest or whatever they might rule it to be.
Well, because it's a third round, it's a no contest. If it's the fourth round, it would have been scored on the merit of the fight, in which case he would have probably, I don't know, he would have, well, it turns out he would have had to fight on, otherwise he would have lost.
Yep.
Which is interesting, right? But yeah, even with the point, Taniguchi got the job done in the end. It's flyweight. It's not your typical flyweight fight. I was kind of surprised to see it play out the way that it did. Taniguchi was content just kind of chip away against the fence. At the end of the fight, when I was in the cage, I had a chat to Jesse Adam Miles. No one really knew where it was going. But yeah, what we end up with is our second Japanese champion at the top of the Eternal ranks with Kuya Ito at bantamweight. So yeah, really interesting times, and the Japanese takeover has begun.
My impression of the fight as the fight kind of went on was, and let me say this first about Frank Jankowski, like an absolute dog, no quitting the man, as we said, like, could have taken that moment because he was hurt. That was a hard shot. Like, he could have just taken that and said, like, hey, let's call this a day because, hey, I've put my title on the line when I wasn't training for a title fight. I've come over the other side of the country. There's no hometown advantage for me to just walk down the street to. I've got to come all the way across to the Gold Coast and save a fight with my title, mind you, in someone else's city where they're training out of. So zero to say bad about Frank Jankowski whatsoever here. But in terms of the way that I saw him fighting this fight, it seemed like to me that he was treating this fight as such, and that's why he was so grappling heavy, because he does have like a really well-rounded skill set. I think Ben Vick has mentioned this on the telecast, that he was surprised that he wasn't using a lot more of his striking and his stance switching. And, he's got those beautiful knees and everything. He does have quite a crisp jab. It just seemed like to me that he was treating this as like, hey, I've had to come over here and put my belt on the line. Let's just grind out a win in a dirty way. We'll take the belt back home, and for the next title fight, we'll put on a bit more of a show. That was sort of the impression I got, and he was obviously surprised by the result at the end too.
Yeah, look, Steve Walden is the Australian national team coach for a reason. Like the guy is a savant at this stuff. For me, he'd be in the conversation of like the top three coaches we have in the country. It's without a doubt the proof's in the pudding, right? And they would have known, as most did, that Taniguchi has fought under the Shuto rule set, in Japan where it's 2 by 5 minute rounds. So it makes sense then to come in with a wrestling heavy game plan and drag him into the championship rounds. That makes a lot of sense. See how he goes there. It was also Taniguchi's first time fighting at flyweight. The guy's been a bantamweight.
Hey, yep.
And was, he was preparing for a very different opponent in Shane Parker, also mind you, a wrestler. And I think, maybe there, like if they had gone a more striking heavy game plan when Taniguchi had predominantly been preparing for a high level wrestler, what effect would have that had? But it's all in retrospect now. You just don't know, right? But man, like flyweight, another division that's incredibly interesting. We have a lot of guys coming through. Lachinese is progressing towards being in the conversation for a shot. Oda Musket with a couple more fights is right there on his heels. Drillich coming back to Australia, no doubt we'll see him coming back to reclaim his bout and make his run back towards Dana White Contender Series of the UFC. Colton Kielbasa came all the way from Phuket for this fight. He was standing there in the audience. I saw him up against the fence. And if Jankowski had won, I had some questions about their initial fight. If you remember back in Perth, Colton Kielbasa dominated that fight for 3 rounds, completely out-wrestled Frank the Tank. Frank made a beautiful adjustment coming into the 4th with a flying knee and got the rear naked choke finish, I believe. So I'd love to see those two settle the score, both coming off a loss now. And maybe to have a look at the winner of Taniguchi versus Drillich earlier on in the year, maybe for up in Perth.
No,
what do you reckon?
Look, I'd absolutely pay to see that, of course. I'd like to see that. Obviously, Anthony Drillich was calling for it. I think he was licking his chops at the prospect of Taniguchi coming over the belt. Not that I think there's a big emphasis at this level of MMA in terms of like trying to create fresh matchups like you might see in the UFC. Like that's a sort of a different kind of game. But I mean, it has to be said, they haven't fought each other. Obviously, Anthony Drillich has a win over Frank Jankowski. So this is a fresh matchup that we can certainly sink our teeth into. And Anthony Drillich certainly does need an opponent. So yes, let's get that one done in Perth. Anthony Drillich was a fantastic flyweight champion. He certainly earned that shot to come back here and get another shot if he wants to. He's done great things for Australian MMA. And he's certainly, maybe just another win or two away from putting himself back in that conversation if he can get the job done over a guy like Taniguchi. But again, like you said before, we've got a couple of Japanese champions within the organization now, and it's just highlighting what we talked about on the last podcast about fostering this relationship with these Asian fighters coming over, particularly from Japan and Korea and stuff like that, and just giving us a new pool of guys to draw from to be able to put on these fights. And, from everything that I've seen, it's the relationship's fantastic. These guys are blending so well with our guys. They've got, it's not an animosity type thing. They're going out for beers with these guys afterwards, and I hope Taniguchi got his beer afterwards because he was so keen for that after the end of the fight. But it's great to see these regions coming together and giving these guys some fantastic options going forward. So again, congratulations to Taniguchi. Not the most fan-friendly fight, to put it in the friendliest way possible, but he gets the win done most importantly. And let's see if we can get that Drillich matchup next in Perth. But this was just this was the appetizer for the two big bulls coming in for the middleweight championship. The vacant middleweight championship, we talked about one of the last podcasts we did about Ben Johnston being the previous middleweight champion, who got that belt of John Martin Fraser, hanging up the gloves. All the best to you, Ben Johnston, in retirement. But it turned this fight between John Martin Fraser and Darcy Vendy into a title fight. This is already a fight at the top of the billing in a non-title fight main event. We just got to sweeten the pot a little bit by throwing the middleweight strap in the middle for these two guys to go at it. And my God, man, go at it they did. I mean, you just can't appreciate if no one's ever sat cage side for two guys like this or for anything at all. Like, this was just Godzilla versus King Kong together. Just a couple of big bulls just clashing in the middle, grinding up against the cage, throwing hell for leather. Like, it was just a blend of just technique, speed, power, dirty boxing. Now, for as long as it lasted, obviously Darcy Vendy came out with a win with a fantastic knockout that just knocked John Martin Fraser off his feet, got the job done. Darcy Vendy, of course, training out of the Fight Center with Ben Johnston. So nice little bit of poetry there for him taking the belt, that his head coach in Ben Johnston previously held. Great to see Darcy Vendy back in the cage, back where he belongs, put a lot of personal stuff behind him to get here. You feel sad for John Martin Fraser after coming off a great win. John's made no secret of wanting to be in the UFC himself, and this was really go time for John, being 32 years of age. Really needed to start to put some wins together, and he looked fantastic doing it. But it was Darcy Vendy's night. I'll let you talk a little bit about the fight. There was some couple of great moments that came from that, a couple little tear-jerker moments, but this was a clash of the Titans, man. And for as long as it lasted, what an incredibly great fight it was.
Yeah, I had a fight at middleweight, and I was like watching those two guys. I'm like, what the fuck was I doing as a middleweight man?
Yeah,
those guys are huge, and they're just everything they hit with. But obviously, both incredibly powerful guys like Vendy. Like they only stopped carving him out of granite at weigh-ins. He was like prancing around in his undies. Just
I can't believe
huge,
how
man.
big he is.
Like an absolute workhorse.
Yeah.
And John Martin Fraser, he's got that different kind of power, that natural, unbridled kind of Welsh power, that was born in the Highlands of Wales.
Functional strength. Like he's been picking up hay bales and stuff like that, working on a farm or something. It's not weightlifting. It's just grown man strength type stuff.
Yeah, he's just a bad dude. I love dirty boxing. Like when a fight's fought on the inside, the way those two guys were putting it together, oh my God, I love that shit. The body shots, the short elbows on the inside, the knees. Darcy Vendy's kicking game was greatly improved from what I've seen in the past. That right kick that he was letting rip to the body of Martin Fraser was quite something, and it invariably ended up being what caught Fraser coming out of that dirty boxing exchange. I wouldn't be surprised if that was something that that Ben Johnson's been working on. That being a Muay Thai world champion, that is very much a Muay Thai technique. As soon as you get out of the clinch, the pummel, if the referee's not breaking it up and you're offsetting your opponent with a little angle, that's when you bring in the high kick, and he caught him and had him wobbled. The game plan for Vendy looked like they were going to try and catch Martin Fraser traveling laterally along the fence and try and catch him with a shifting right hook, which interestingly is how Martin Fraser has finished a lot of guys over time. But in fact, I've confirmed that's what it was, because I asked Johnson directly, and that's what he got him with, shut him out. So the blueprint was there. It was implemented at an incredibly high level. Fraser hurt Vendy at times, but every time Vendy was hurt, he always came back straight away, strong. And he's spoken about the mentality behind that, the mental resilience that he's developed. Just talking about loving that shit. Like when he gets hit, he accepts it, and then he wants to give it back tenfold, which makes him a really dangerous guy, because that he's not going to sit back and let the fight come to him. He's going to get after it every instance, and he can for 25 minutes. So there was naysayers about Vendy, and quite rightly, a lot of his strength of schedule just it couldn't really stand up to on paper to a guy like Martin Fraser. But the reality is that MMA is not fought on a sheet of paper; it's fought in the cage, and the proof was there. And you can't doubt Darcy Vendy. That guy is the baddest middleweight that we have in Australasia.
Yeah, it certainly sets up some intriguing prospects going forward. We mentioned Matt Myers, obviously the former belt holder. Looks like he's got himself into good health. Obviously, Matt Myers and John Martin Fraser have gone at it in the past, and those guys won a piece. I mean, Matt Myers is an absolute bull himself. So if that's the next matchup, I mean, sign me up. But I mean, in terms of this one coming into the fight as well, like it wasn't just a fight, and then it wasn't just a fight that became a title fight. Like, these were a couple of guys that were coming in that were talking a mad load of shit about each other, didn't like each other. Just wanted to put hands on each other, and it wasn't one of those ones where they talked about putting hands on each other and then just didn't for 25 minutes or 15 minutes or however long a fight might go for. Like, they put hands on each other from the opening bell, and just gave such an incredible to count on themselves. Of course, John Martin Fraser being a former two-time middleweight champion, he'll certainly be back. He wants to keep himself in the mix. It was all certainly about Darcy Vendy, though. You just talk about the strength of schedule. I mean, he had has sort of a kind of a strange career arc, because I mean, if you recall back, or fans recall back, people might not know this, Darcy Vendy was the last man to give Jack Della Maddalena a loss before Jack was Jack, when he was on that 0-2 run to start his career. And then he sort of had another win and then went on through 2017 to 2019 with just 2 fights. And both of those were losses. Come back and got himself on a 3-fight winning streak up until winning this title. So hopefully that this is sort of more the start of more of a sustained run for Darcy Vendy for all accounts and purposes, or for all intents and purposes. It sounds like that might be the case, given that he did talk about a lot of personal stuff that he had to put behind him. Talked about, in the cage about, settling some things with his parents. I think one of the key things he said was, he's always been here, but he had to just get the real him to come out in order to be in that position. And that gave us a fantastic moment in the cage with Daddy Ravioli, John Aiello, his best mate. Sounds like they've been best mates forever and a day. What an unusual position that must have been for John Aiello, obviously being the MC in the cage, obviously doing his professional part, but also watching the fight back and seeing him announce Darcy Vendy as a new champion. You could see the emotion in his face, and I don't mind saying that I shed a little bit of a tear both times in the cage. Just a little tiny bit. I wasn't full crying, but watching it back at home as well. It just shows you that for all the great moments that we have in mixed martial arts and for the great title fights and the fantastic things that these guys do and everything they put on the line, that these guys are still humans at the end of the day, and the fantastic relationships they have. That was a fantastic moment for those guys to both share them with each other. But going forward, the middleweight title picture, Matt Myers, I think that's got to be the way to go. Curious as to what you think.
I felt like Dr. Phil there for a moment when I was facilitating that interview in the cage.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's appropriate or not. But yeah, man, it's a special sport that we have here. It's really primal in a sense. It's 2 contestants and they're duking it out, and probably the most raw form of combat that you could have, unless you guys met up in the jungle at midnight. And it's an individual pursuit, but moments like that with John Aiello just show the importance of it also having a team component, and that the people who you surround yourself with, who you recognize as those in your corner, not just on the night, but throughout the lead up to the camp, can have a profound effect on who you are as your athletic identity, but also in your personal life too. And to have someone like Jonathan Aiello, who obviously understands the sport, he's got a successful career developing inside the cage, but to have that kind of support outside the cage, that's going to be a huge asset and a really cool thing for those 2 guys to have. I'm not sure about my career in the future as hosting kind of Dr. Phil type daytime television. To be honest with you, Luke, I'm not sure I'm cut out for that, but it also wasn't the question. The question was about Matt Myers. I feel that might be the one on the cards, but I kind of can't say too much because with Cam Rowston waiting in the wings, who knows what will happen there? Or maybe I know, and I'm just not saying.
Maybe you know things that the rest of us don't know, us plebs. But I mean, look, there's options in the middleweight division. Certainly, it's a division, like we said, that is finally cooking back here for Eternal MMA in Australia as well. So exciting things to come there. Before we just move on to the last part of the show, before we wrap up, one of my favorite moments from the fight, outside of the fight itself, outside of the emotion at the end of the fight, and I didn't obviously know this until I watched the broadcast back, but Ben Vickers having his own little humanistic moment there. When Darcy Vendy landed that head kick on John Martin Fraser, and I just hear this, holy shit! And just all of a sudden he goes silent, and just I know he would have been kicking himself in that moment, but it was just such a funny moment, and I love Ben Vickers so much. He's just such an unintentionally funny guy, and just to hear that on the broadcast as well, just in that pure leaking out a bit of a fan moment from him. You obviously heard it live in real time. That amused me a lot.
Yeah, I think in weeks to come, you'll see some footage from that moment because there was actually a camera on us and I jumped right out of my seat, still attached to the soundboard. It's the first time I've done that, like a Joe Rogan kind of call me a, kind of reaction where you jump up. And it was kind of involuntary. At the end of the day, look, we don't do this because it's just a job. We love the sport. I love this sport. I am bestowed with this unique opportunity to be a fan of the sport, talk about the sport that I love and the best seat in the house, and not get punched in the face. So when you have that kind of visceral reaction and you exclaim, that's because we love what we're seeing. We love the sport. We love Eternal MMA. We've got the highest caliber fights happening right here in Australia, and 1 meter from us in our commentary position. So you're going to get that for time to time. Maybe not from Tanada Nathan, because he's the best commentator in Australia, an absolute consummate professional on the mic. But yeah, from me and B Vickers occasionally, absolutely, we're a little bit of a diamond in the rough.
No, I loved it. Can't begrudge that moment. You couldn't have put it better myself in terms of being in that privileged position and allowing the human side of it to come out. Because at the end of the day, you can't be a fan of this sport and find yourself in these positions by accident. Like, this is where it all comes from. We're all fans of the sport. I mentioned this in the last podcast we did today. Just giving my personal thanks to Cam and Ben for having me up for the fights. I'll say it again here. It was just absolutely made my year to be able to sit opposite you guys and see you guys work, and just be able to enjoy that weekend as a whole. Just meant so much to me. I thought about it the other night as to how much it meant to me, and I don't mind saying I got a bit emotional because it was such a treat. It was an absolute honor to be up there and just be part of a fantastic weekend. There's nothing like Eternal MMA. There's nothing like MMA at this level. It's just such a special, intimate thing that's shared very specifically, not very specifically, but if you compare it to sort of the UFC, it's a very different thing because it's a lot of family, it's a lot of friends, it's a lot of gym partners, like all sort of together in the same environment, kind of making this thing go around. You meet so many great people who contribute towards this thing. So again, thank you so much to the guys that got me up there and got involved. Thank you to you, obviously, as well, Matt, for showing me the ropes a bit while I was there. That was fantastic. We did talk a little bit before this about wanting to give a bit of a shout out to anything that you like from the prelims, from the amateur fights, which I breezed past and forgot to an Eternal 90 breakdown that we did. But was there anything just for a little bit of shine on the amateur side of things, either across Eternal 90 or Eternal 91, that you found was worth a call out? For me, Ran Deng was obvious there in terms of I assume he goes pro next. So I think he's now 5, maybe 6-0 as an amateur, getting a knockout win there at Eternal 90. But it must be said, we talk about the pros a lot, but the amateurs certainly showed out as well across Eternal 90 and Eternal 91.
Yeah, I'd like to shout out my man, the dictator, Barad Masimi. I thought that was an incredible adaptation in between the corners. He took on Dallas Delasanya Dennis, who, if you haven't seen him fight before, go and check that out. These guys are just a couple more of these flyweights that are going to come over. And, to think that at one stage we weren't going to have a flyweight division in the UFC is just insanity. When you see Dallas Dennis have a scrap and Channel was, miniature as well. Adesanya in there. That guy's an incredible athlete. Excuse me, getting all choked up about these little bastards. And Barad Masimi, that adaptation that he made to come back to secure the guillotine was, mate, that was just top tier. Emotion written all over his face. I absolutely loved that moment, especially after just the one fight. He's only had one fight, training with his father in a garage from the age of 4. Like that, the emotion just written all over his face. I loved that. And my new man, Josh the Menace O'Brien, finishing sequence.
Yeah.
Or Randall Rowan is a really good up-and-coming fighter, young, but Josh O'Brien is 100% finish rate now in 5 of his fights. I believe they're all in the first round too. And that front kick that he got him with, and then to recognise that the elbow had dropped, because Randall Rowan did a good job of disguising that moment to step in with that right uppercut to the body. Mate, we've just got some absolute killers in this country, which leads me onto 91, the feature prelim, which was Cooper Martin, who was looking shit hot as well. He's got some serious knockout power too. Took on a guy who's never fought before, and this was for the feature prelim bout, Marcus Hader. Where's that guy been our whole lives? He's got such a massive personality. When he came into the weigh-ins, I was sitting down at a bench with Cam O'Neill, and I was pretending to be really busy so I can ask him for a pay rise this week. I was actually just push the buttons. Computer wasn't even on, but Marcus Adair came over and just came right up to us and introduced himself so confident. Just loved to be there, not a nerve in sight. And in his debut fight on the feature prelim bout for the doubleheader weekend on Eternal 91. He just put on an absolute excellent finishing display and announced his arrival. So another flyweight bout. Look, the flyweights were the standout for me on the prelims over the weekend. Other than Rang Dang, he's definitely not a flyweight. But yeah, man, what an incredible weekend.
What an incredible weekend, and it's been talked about before, but it just highlights the fact that just the level in this country is rising up. Every single Eternal MMA we have, even from the opening bell. I said this when I joined Mitch Tinley on the Australian MMA podcast for Eternal 90 backstage when we were doing the live stream. I guaranteed to anyone watching, I said, I promise you the first fight is going to end in a finish with these prelims, with the amateur fights, because these guys just bring it every single time. I challenge anyone to go back and look at these guys, especially in the last 12 months. It's not a boring fight on 99.9% of these prelims. They're just turning up, they're showing out, they're giving us some high-level fights. The skill level is just coming up and up and up and up. The sport's still growing, in this country. Pound for pound, we're just one of, if not the top MMA nation in the world, considering the population, how much we're sort of spread out. But every single one of these fights is just incredible. And Eternal MMA is leading the way for that. So hats off to the prelim guys as well, because you are the guys, that set the table for the pro fights, and you'll be the next generation coming up. But yes, the flyweight division on fire. Ran Deng certainly one to watch for me. In the middleweight division, I believe it was, just heavy hands, absolutely crazy. It was a fantastic weekend of fights, man. I absolutely loved it. Loved being there. Loved mixing up with everyone. Loved meeting people. Didn't love the Hot Wing Challenge, but it was a lot of fun. Can't wait to see that one back. It's been an absolutely incredible 2024. We said it on the last podcast. We lean into, obviously, next year. We've got Seb Salai versus Taser Malone set up for Eternal 92. Eternal 93 obviously announced for Perth, February 22nd. And Eternal 94 on the Gold Coast on March 15. Wes Cap versus Raymar Quintana so far for Eternal 93. And the returning former flyweight champion Tim Moore versus Rod Costa in a catchweight 63-kilogram fight. With still plenty more to come, but it's going to be a hell of a 2025, man. Can't wait to see it all go down. 2024 has been great. And thank you very much for your time, man. I've loved doing this with you so far. Can't wait to do some more coming into the new year. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love your insight and love learning from guys like you. So from my part, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, bro. The phone line might be a little bit quiet between now and then, but I look forward to direct eye contact across the cage in Sydney, just to distract me a little bit while I'm trying to be professional.
I'll make it happen, brother, but I no doubt you'll keep your composure.